All right, this is Learning with Andrew, okay? So this is gonna be our first day lecture. I'm gonna talk you guys through all this and how I start putting things in my head through to a whiteboard, okay? So we got our nervous system, right? So we got two parts of the nervous system. We got our CNS, we got our PNS. So in our CNS, we know it's made up of our spinal cord and our brain. That's what we need to associate together. In our PNS, it's made up of sensory receptors, sensory organs, and nerves, all right? And this will make sense in just a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna break down the PNS next, all right? So in our PNS, we're gonna have two more divisions. We're gonna have our somatic division and our autonomic division, all right? And so we wanna associate, how I associate in my head is I'm gonna think this capitalized S right here in somatic, we wanna associate it with skeletal, all right? So this is gonna be our skeletal muscle that is gonna be sending and receiving these signals. So sensory neurons, we know are gonna be attached to our receptors, okay? So say you put your hand on a hot cook pot, okay? So we put our hand on a hot oven, okay? Our sensory neurons are gonna be screaming at our brain. They're gonna send a fast signal to our brain. They're be saying, yo, this is hot, get us off.
Hello.
Your brain is gonna interpret that signal, it's gonna send it back through a motor neuron, and it's gonna move your effectors, okay? So, our sensory neurons, we know they're gonna be sending our signal to the CNS. We've put our hand on a hot stove top, it's gonna send that signal to our CNS. That's what a sensory neuron is gonna do. It's gonna travel, or our signal is gonna travel through our sensory neuron, okay? Now we're in our CNS, we're gonna be interpreting it. After we've got our signal handled, we wanna send a response back, it's gonna go back through a motor neuron. So we're sending the signal from our CNS to the skeletal muscle, okay? And so with somatic, like I said, this is all gonna happen in the skeletal system. So now we're gonna move on to autonomic, okay? So this one was associated with skeletal, autonomic is gonna be associated with organs. So with our sensory neurons here, we're gonna be sending a signal, say, from our heart, okay? If we're having any trouble if we need to perspire more or breathe more, we have to send a signal from our heart, which this all goes subconsciously pretty much. Send a signal from our heart, which is our internal organs, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and our glands are gonna be doing this. They're gonna send a signal to our CNS, again, sensory to the CNS. So our signal from our heart is gonna be to our CNS. We're gonna interpret that signal. It's gonna send a signal back through a motor neuron from the CNS to our heart, okay? So we're associating that with organs. And now these are the actual 3 steps of this process right here. Sensory input, integration, and motor output. Now I want you to notice input. Our senses, we're inputting a signal, right? If we put our hand on this hot stove top, our sensory is gonna be input with information. We're gonna send that through a sensory neuron up to our CNS, which is our brain, our spinal cord. We're gonna send that signal. Okay, that's all sensory input is saying, and that's pretty simple. Input, we're receiving and sending a signal to the CNS. If you're a sensory neuron, it's always to the CNS. Integration, what I want you guys to start associating these words together. Integration, I want you to associate with interpret. So now when you see the word integration, I want you to think interpret. Well, what's interpreting our signal? Our CNS. So we've sent our signal, right? Up through our sensory neurons, is to our brain. Our brain's gotta interpret this signal and then send a proper message back to our motor neurons. So we're gonna once we've interpreted this signal, we're gonna send this message through motor output, back through our motor neurons from our brain, and it's gonna carry this message all the way to your receptors, and it's gonna tell you, yo, get your hand off the stove, it's hot.
Dumbass.
Exactly, okay? So those are these 3 steps that are gonna start lining up with this. Like I said in autonomic. Our sensory input is gonna be our heart. We need to breathe faster if we're working out. And that is gonna be sensory input. Once we send that signal to our brain, we've hit integration. Our brain is interpreting, so I want you to associate interpret, integration, is the same word. So I want you to think our CNS, our brain is gonna be interpreting this signal, and once we get a proper response to this, we're gonna send that response back through our motor neurons, which is motor output, and that output is gonna cause us to create whatever our signal is sent. All right? Now we're gonna move up, and these words are gonna start making sense now too. These are types of neurons, correct? So we have afferent neurons, efferent neurons, and interneurons. Well, afferent, I want you guys, it's gonna be dumb, but I want you to think of applesauce, okay? Afferent is associated with sensory neurons. So our afferent neurons is going to make sense if our sensory neurons are sending signals to our CNS. If these are almost interchangeable words, afferent neurons are going to transmit a signal from our receptors to our CNS. That's simple. With efferent, if we're associating these with motor neurons, we already know what those do too. We're getting a signal from our CNS, sending it back to our receptors. Get your hand off the stove. Transmit our signal from the CNS